I want to tell you a story, a true story, about a family that lives in an area in Maine where I lived for many years. This family has been there for several generations. People have come and gone again, but this family has remained in place. There are old records that show different things that they did, different titles they held, including manning many of the area's lighthouses before they all went automatic. I'm going to change their name for this story because I don't want to cause them any hassles. So, for this story, we will call them the Sugar Bakers. Now, the Sugar Bakers have been in Maine for a very long time, and over that time, they have created a certain reputation for themselves. It went from strong and hardworking, to stubborn, to foolhardy, to just plain thieves. When I met them, most of them were a pack of thieves. In fact, they were very well known for thievery, with many of them having been arrested several times, and still others serving time in jail to this day. And they have continued on their course of thievery. Anytime anyone in the area acquired anything, a joke would be made about hiding it from the Sugar Bakers. "Watch out, better not let the Sugar Bakers see it." And everyone would laugh, to which someone else would reply, "Just keep your bar loaded with booze and they'll take that instead." And everyone would laugh doubly so, because actually that was true. The Sugar Bakers were famous for breaking in and stealing many bottles of booze, often leaving priceless possessions untouched in their desire for alcohol. I resented them, because this was during a time in Maine when none of us ever locked our doors. I didn't even know where my keys were most of the time. It was a simpler, better time. And anyone who tells you that the past was no better than current days doesn't know shit from Shinola. It was a hell of a lot better. Nowadays we seem to be importing questionable entities, and a lock on the door is par for the course. And some of the newcomers are far worse than the Sugar Bakers could ever dream of being. But I digress. That does remind me of the time I was in the local post office. Just one big room, really. And a Sugar Baker was there picking up a package. She stated her name loudly, and at the disparaging looks that came from just about everyone in the room, she turned around and put her hands on her hips and said, "Not all of us are bad, you know." "Yeah, I know, we have a bad reputation." Then she took her package, put her nose up in the air, and left. Anyway, what I wanted to tell you about them was something I learned quite by accident. I am one of those people who loves to walk through old boneyards and absorb the history and the mystery that they slowly reveal. And if there's one thing Maine has a lot of, it's old boneyards. On one particular trip, I was in a section where the youngest grave was a good 150 years old, and the oldest grave was quite senior to that. Other than the lawn mowed haphazardly by town workers occasionally, this was a long forgotten section and no one ever visited it. Or so I thought. I happened upon some graves in the back near the old stone wall, and I saw some little flowers that drew me there. Now, these were not flowers like you see in wealthy graveyards, where people plant exotic blooms in urns that cost thousands of dollars, which adorn huge headstones that shout out to passers-by, "I am wealthy, even in my death. Look at me, I am wealthy." No, this was not anything like that at all. These graves were small, with stones marking long-forgotten people, except they weren't forgotten. There were no expensive urns or flower pots anywhere, but someone had planted many marigolds directly in the soil all around the graves. The grass was cut a little lower than the rest of the boneyard, and leaves from the fallen trees had been raked, unlike other sections of the graves. I went to see who they were. Who would plant flowers at such old graves? And on the graves it said sugar baker. There were several of them, all long since gone, well over 100 years prior, I would say, many more than that. And yet, someone had come back to the graveyard and purposely took care of these little graves and planted the flowers. And they were well watered too, meaning that the caretaker visited often. These people had all died long before the current, mysterious planter of flowers had even been born. So you can't say that the person knew them directly and was somehow grieving their loss. And I sat there looking at the little graves, which were very small and nondescript, indicating that they were very poor, as the sugar bakers have always been. But someone had been to the graves and lovingly took care of them, and I wondered about that. There are a lot of sugar bakers buried in the area, some in graveyards and some on private property. In Maine, you can still bury the dead on their own property instead of being forced to go to a graveyard. And I think that's really great because you should be buried with your own land. The soil and blood are one after all. But someone remembered these people and still loved them. It made me realize that not only did he or she know where the graves were, but the family must have talked about the different ancestors, who they were and what they did and how they lived and how much they were loved. They must have kept good records of the deaths and where the graves were located. And I thought, there must have been a great deal of respect and love and dedication and loyalty for someone to come back to these crumbly old graves far in the back of the graveyard and rake the leaves and trim the grass and adorn the graves with simple flowers. Marigolds are cheap and simple little flowers, never getting more than about maybe 6 inches or so tall. They are the perfect poor man's flower. They will never win any prizes, and they rarely catch the eye of anyone. It occurred to me that there are many kinds of wealth. Most of us just focus on the kind that sits in a bank account, and you can hardly blame people with the way the world is these days. But I learned on that day that at least one of the sugar bakers, and probably several of them, were wealthy in a completely different way. They were wealthy with memories, wealthy with devotion, wealthy with loyalty, wealthy with true pride as opposed to false pride, and wealthy with love and respect for their ancestors. How many people can say that? Most people don't even know or care who their ancestors were. Now that's not half bad for some of the poorest people in town, is it? The records of the old town recorded many things that the sugar bakers did. I have read these records myself. Granted, most of the recent records are not stellar at all, and in fact, quite disparaging, and rightly so. But the older records speak of people with integrity, strength, courage, and cunning. And those qualities can be inherited and relearned and regained. All it takes is one person with unwavering courage. I still wouldn't leave my door unlocked if they were around, just asking for a sugar baker visit that way. The current crop is still mostly thieves, but you see, they're our thieves, as opposed to the recent influx of thieves from elsewhere, and that makes a difference. Indeed it does. They are our thieves. So I will continue to look for the marigolds as I go about my walks in the old boneyards of Maine, where history and mystery call me by name. There's buried treasure everywhere here, and some of it is lying right out in the open.